In the world of exotic reptiles, where rare snakes are bred and sold for thousands of dollars, the death of Ben Renick sent shockwaves far beyond the reptile community. Ben was no ordinary breeder. He was a respected figure in the industry, known for his expertise and dedication to his reptiles at his farm, Renick Reptiles. But in June 2017, his death would reveal a much darker truth, one filled with lies, betrayal, and the kind of deception that could make even the cold-blooded creatures he worked with seem tame in comparison. This isn't just the story of a snake farm gone wrong. No, this is a chilling tale of how a successful man's life was stolen from him by those closest to him. A husband, a father, a businessman, all stripped away by a web of lies, illicit affairs, and a dangerous scheme that led to murder. As the investigation unfolded, what seemed like a tragic accident quickly turned into a complex conspiracy. At the center of it all, his wife, Lynley Renick. Was it simply a case of a tragic love story gone sour, or was something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface? Behind the seemingly quiet life they shared, there was a battle of greed, desperation, and the kind of betrayal that could only end in tragedy. Buckle up, because this story is about to take you down a path of deceit and criminal intent where nothing is as it seems. Let's dive into the twisted story of Ben Renick and the deadly secrets hidden at Renick Reptiles. New Florence, Missouri, is the kind of town where everyone knows your name, and the streets are quiet enough for you to hear the wind rustling through the trees. A small, almost forgotten place in Montgomery County, it's a town that seems like the last place where dark secrets would fester. But New Florence had more to hide than anyone could have imagined. Beneath its peaceful exterior, a twisted story was unfolding. One that would shock not just the town, but the entire reptile breeding community. At the heart of this story was Ben Renick, a man whose life seemed straight out of a fairy tale. Born in St. Louis in August 1987, Ben grew up with his younger brother, Sam, in a family that had more than its fair share of wealth and success. His father, Frank Renick, was the owner of Spectrum, a thriving pet food company that was doing so well, it had a place on the map of America's corporate giants. Frank's success painted a picture of a family that had it all: money, power, and a future that seemed assured. But all that glitters isn't gold. In 2012, Frank's world came crashing down when he was caught running a Ponzi scheme with his company. Instead of using the investments for business growth, Frank had been siphoning money into his own pocket, using new investors to pay back the old ones. The scheme collapsed, leaving investors in the dust and tarnishing the Renick name. Even the Renick family's home in New Florence wasn't immune to tragedy. Years earlier, it had mysteriously exploded, and although no one was hurt, the court later ruled it was caused by something far more sinister than an accident. Frank's downfall raised questions about what lengths he had gone to, and whether his actions would haunt his sons, especially Ben. Despite the public scandals and the stains on the Renick family legacy, Ben managed to carve out a life that seemed to be untouched by his father's mistakes. He wasn't involved in any of the shady dealings. He was a quiet, hard-working man. Ben's passion was snakes, and he turned it into a successful career in the exotic reptile breeding business. Renick Reptiles was his pride and joy, with hundreds of rare and valuable snakes, including some that could fetch tens of thousands of dollars. Ben had established a reputation for producing some of the finest designer pythons in the country. His business was booming, and he quickly earned the nickname, the Snake Guy, among those who knew him. From the outside, Ben's life seemed perfect. He was a beloved husband to Lynley, a dedicated father to their children, and an emerging star in the world of exotic animal breeding. But perfection has a way of crumbling. As Ben's reputation soared, so did the tension at home. And when tragedy struck, it wasn't just his snakes that would be left in a pit of mystery. The Renick family's secrets were about to unravel, and the quiet town of New Florence would never be the same. It was a warm evening on June 8, 2017, when everything changed. The sun was still lingering low in the sky, casting a soft glow over Renick Reptiles in New Florence, Missouri, a place that had always been Ben Renick's sanctuary. But on that day, it became a scene of horror. Lynley Renick's frantic 911 call sent the small town into a state of shock. Her voice, shaky and filled with panic, echoed through the phone. "My husband's on the ground and there's blood everywhere," she screamed, barely able to catch her breath. It had to have been one of the snakes. It seemed plausible. Ben was surrounded by thousands of snakes, many of which were deadly. For a moment, it felt like another freak accident in the world of exotic animal breeding, a snake strike gone horribly wrong. But this wasn't the case, not even close. When police arrived at the scene, they were greeted by a chilling sight. Ben Renick was lying face down, surrounded by his prized reptiles, the creatures he'd spent years breeding and selling. But as officers took in the scene, something didn't add up. There were no signs of a snake attack, no bite marks, no defensive wounds that would suggest Ben had struggled with one of his creatures. What they did find were shell casings scattered across the floor. The grim truth was beginning to sink in. Ben hadn't been killed by a snake. He had been shot 8 times. The shots were deliberate, methodical. A contact wound to the back of the head confirmed that Ben didn't even have a chance to defend himself. His death was not an accident, nor was it the result of a reptile's venomous strike. This was cold-blooded murder. As the investigators began piecing together the evidence, it became clear that whoever had done this was no stranger to Ben. His brother, Sam, who had arrived at the scene before the police, was initially convinced the cause was a snake. But as soon as the police confirmed the truth, suspicion began to fall on those closest to Ben. His wife, Lynley, had been the first to find him. Why had she called Sam first instead of 911? Was there something more to her panic than just the shock of finding her husband lying dead? The more investigators dug into the scene, the more they realized that Ben's killer was someone who had easy access to his life. Someone who knew his routine and, most importantly, his weaknesses. The murder wasn't a random act. It was a calculated betrayal. And the mystery only deepened as Lynley's actions began to look more suspicious with every passing hour. Had she been hiding a secret? Was she involved in a deadly plot that she never thought would be uncovered? The discovery of Ben's death was just the beginning. And as the investigation unfolded, one thing became clear. This murder wasn't just about money or snakes. It was about something far more personal. Something that would send shockwaves through the lives of those closest to him. As the investigation into Ben Renick's shocking murder began, the authorities were left with more questions than answers. The quiet town of New Florence, which had been rocked by Ben's untimely death, now found itself in the middle of a gripping mystery. And as detectives combed through the evidence, no one was off the table, not even Ben's own family. The first person to come under suspicion was Ben's brother, Sam. Sam had arrived at the scene before the police, driven there by Lynley's frantic call. When he found Ben lying motionless in a pool of blood, his immediate assumption was that Ben had been attacked by one of his snakes. After all, this was a reptile farm, and Ben spent his days handling venomous creatures. It seemed like a logical conclusion. But as the police began to investigate further, they started to see something troubling in Sam's behavior. Sam had been very close to Ben, so close, in fact, that it was revealed that Ben had been considering selling the family's property, which would affect Sam's living situation. The investigators looked into this. Could Sam have been upset about the sale and acted out of anger or financial concern? The more they dug, the more they began to wonder if there was a motive lurking beneath the surface. But after a thorough investigation, including polygraph tests and background checks, Sam was cleared of any involvement in Ben's death. He was cooperative, offered up his alibi, and even passed the polygraph. The police moved on, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. If Sam wasn't responsible, then who could it be? The investigation had to go deeper. As the case progressed, all signs began pointing back to Ben's wife, Lynley. She had been the one to find him, the one to make the frantic 911 call. At first, her reaction seemed like that of a grieving wife. But the more the detectives questioned her, the more cracks started to appear in her story. She claimed she hadn't seen anything unusual that day, but her behavior was far from ordinary. Her answers were vague, and her emotions seemed strangely controlled. The police couldn't ignore it. Something didn't add up. What really set off alarm bells was Lindley's failed polygraph test. Despite her insistence that she knew nothing about Ben's murder, the polygraph results painted a different picture. It wasn't the kind of evidence that could convict her on its own, but it was enough to make the detectives wary. If Lindley had nothing to hide, why had she struggled with the truth? As the investigation continued, the detectives uncovered a troubling pattern. Lindley had been hiding her financial struggles, using Ben's successful business to prop up her failing spa, Essentia. She had even tried to poison Ben a month before his death, lacing a protein shake with a large quantity of Percocet, an attempt that failed, leaving Ben sick but alive. Why had she done this? Was she so desperate for money, for control, that she would risk everything? Then there was the matter of her affairs. Rumors had been circulating about Lindley's relationship with at least 2 different men, one of whom was Michael Humphrey, an ex-boyfriend who was still in her life after her marriage to Ben. Was it possible that Lindley had been unhappy in her marriage, so much so that she would conspire to have Ben killed? Was the man she once loved now a willing accomplice to her plan? As the detectives pieced everything together, the suspicion around Lindley grew stronger. Her failed polygraph, her involvement in shady financial dealings, and her apparent emotional detachment were all pointing toward one thing. Lindley had something to hide. The question now wasn't if she was involved, but how deep her involvement went. The more they learned about her, the more the detectives realized that this wasn't a simple case of a tragic accident. It was a carefully orchestrated murder, and Lindley Renick was likely at the center of it all. But the truth was elusive, and the investigation was only beginning to uncover the tangled web of lies and betrayal that would eventually lead to shocking revelations. The road to justice was just getting started, and it was clear that nothing and no one was as it seemed. As the investigation peeled back the layers of Lindley Renick's life, the truth about her troubled marriage to Ben and her desperate financial troubles began to emerge. From the outside, they seemed like a picture-perfect couple, but beneath the surface, their relationship was anything but. What looked like a loving union was slowly crumbling under the weight of lies, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of financial desperation. Lindley's spa business, Essentia, was failing. She had poured money into it, but it was nowhere near as successful as she had hoped. Her financial struggles had been mounting for months, and despite her attempts to keep it hidden from Ben, the stress was taking a toll. Ben, with his successful snake breeding business, was the breadwinner, and Lindley had been relying on his income to support her failing venture. But Ben wasn't happy about it. He was upset that their personal finances were tied to a business that wasn't making money, and their arguments became more frequent as Lindley continued to siphon money from his business to keep hers afloat. The tension was palpable. Ben was increasingly fed up, and Lindley feared that if things didn't change, he would leave her, taking everything with him. As her world crumbled around her, Lindley's relationship with Ben became more strained, and in the midst of the financial pressure, her personal life took a dangerous turn. It was revealed that Lindley had been having an affair. Her ex-boyfriend, Michael Humphrey, had re-entered her life, and their relationship was far from innocent. But Michael wasn't just a part of her past. He became a key player in the twisted plot that would end Ben's life. Michael Humphrey wasn't just an ex-boyfriend. He was a man with a history of criminal behavior, a violent past, and a dangerous presence in Lindley's life. After their affair rekindled, Michael became a confidant for Lindley, someone she leaned on when things with Ben seemed to be spiraling out of control. Lindley confided in Michael about her deteriorating marriage, about her financial woes, and about her growing fear that Ben was planning to leave her. She was desperate, and Michael saw an opportunity. It wasn't long before the whispers of a deadly plan began to surface. Lindley, feeling cornered by her failing business and her crumbling marriage, decided to take matters into her own hands. She needed Ben out of the picture, permanently. But it wasn't just about the money. No, this was about control, about saving herself from a future she feared she couldn't escape. And Michael, ever the willing accomplice, agreed to help her. But the plot wasn't simple. It had to be carefully executed. First, Lindley attempted to poison Ben. She laced a protein shake with a massive dose of Percocet, hoping to incapacitate him long enough to make her move. She watched as Ben drank the shake, praying it would work. But it didn't. Instead, Ben fell ill, bedridden for days. But he survived. It was a failed attempt, one that only made Lindley more desperate. She knew she couldn't make another mistake. This time, Ben had to die. Lindley's failed poisoning attempt only added fuel to the fire. She was now on the edge, cornered by her own actions. But instead of backing off, she doubled down. The plot to kill Ben was no longer just about the money. It was about making sure no one stood in her way. The lines between love, greed, and betrayal had blurred, and the plan had become far darker than anyone could have imagined. As the authorities pieced together these chilling details, one question lingered. What lengths would Lindley go to for the life she wanted? And more importantly, who else would she drag into her web of deceit to ensure her survival? The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, and each revelation seemed more shocking than the last. Would Lindley's greed and desperation lead to her husband's death? Or would her plans spiral out of control, setting off a chain of events that would unravel everything? The tension was mounting, and the truth was inching closer to the surface. By the time June 8, 2017 arrived, the plot to kill Ben Renick had been set into motion. Lindley and Michael Humphrey, two people entangled in a web of lies, betrayal, and desperation, had made a chilling plan. Michael, the ex-boyfriend turned accomplice, was initially going to be the one to pull the trigger. He was the muscle, the one who would do the dirty work. But as the day approached, something changed. The gravity of what they were about to do began to sink in. When the day came, Michael was supposed to follow through, but he hesitated. Fear took over, and he backed out at the last moment. It wasn't the first time Michael had been faced with violence, but this was different. He wasn't ready to take a life. The plan was now falling apart. Lindley, however, was beyond the point of retreat. Her financial troubles, her fears of losing everything, and her growing hatred for Ben clouded her judgment. She wasn't going to let Michael's hesitation stop her. If she wanted Ben dead, she would have to do it herself. As the afternoon sun began to dip, Lindley and Michael drove to the snake farm. Ben was outside, taking care of the daily chores. He was unaware that his life was about to be taken. The tension in the air was thick, but Ben, ever the trusting husband, had no reason to suspect that anything was wrong. Lindley approached him under the guise of casual conversation, as if nothing was amiss. She introduced Michael as just an old friend who had an interest in snakes. Ben, ever polite and friendly, didn't think twice about letting Michael into his world. But as they walked around the farm, the plan grew clearer. Michael, uneasy and unsure of himself, started to falter. But Lindley was determined. They had already come this far, and there was no turning back now. She took the gun that had been tucked away for just this moment, a handgun she had brought with her, and in one swift, calculated move, shot Ben. The first shot hit him in the chest. Ben, still caught off guard, staggered back, but he wasn't dead. Lindley fired again, a total of 4 shots to his chest, followed by 2 more to his arm. Ben was reeling, but he was still alive, still fighting for his life. But Lindley wasn't finished. The final shot, the one that would end it all, was fired directly into his head. It was a point-blank shot, a contact wound, one that made sure there would be no chance of survival. Ben's life was stolen in an instant, his future, his family, his dreams, all wiped away in a flash of cold, calculated violence. Lindley stood over Ben's body, the gun in her hand, her pulse racing. But her job wasn't over. Michael, who had been a witness to the murder, was now a part of the cover-up. He helped her move Ben's body, ensuring that the crime scene appeared as if nothing had been disturbed. They scattered the shell casings around the floor, making sure the scene looked chaotic, as if someone had broken in and killed Ben during a robbery gone wrong. Afterward, Lindley and Michael drove away from the farm, leaving Ben's body behind, as if nothing had happened. The murder was done, but the weight of what they had just done was now heavy on their shoulders. Lindley, however, remained focused. She had a plan to cover it all up, and she wasn't going to let the aftermath derail everything she had worked for. At the spa, Lindley changed her clothes and showered, acting as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Michael helped her dispose of the gun and the clothes they had worn that day, making sure no evidence would tie them back to the murder. It was a chilling display of cold precision. Two people who had once been involved in a relationship now working together in a deadly conspiracy to cover up the most horrific crime. But the truth would soon come to light. They may have thought they had gotten away with it, but nothing stays hidden forever. The murder of Ben Renick was just the beginning of a dark, twisting story that would eventually unravel. And as the authorities closed in, the betrayal, the lies, and the twisted motives behind the crime would finally be exposed. For 3 long years, the murder of Ben Renick remained an unsolved mystery. Despite the promising start to the investigation and the initial suspicions surrounding his wife, Lindley, the case went cold. The authorities had little to work with, no solid evidence, no definitive leads, and no clear answers about who was responsible for the brutal killing. It was a frustrating and disheartening time for everyone involved, and the investigation seemed to hit a dead end. During those 3 years, rumors and whispers about Ben's death spread throughout the small town of New Florence, but nothing concrete surfaced. Sam, Ben's brother, continued to cooperate with the authorities, and Lindley, though a prime suspect, remained free, despite her suspicious behavior and failed polygraph. It seemed like the mystery would remain unsolved forever. But in January 2020, a crucial break came from an unexpected source: Brandon Blackwell. Brandon was an incarcerated man, someone who had no connection to the Renick family, except for his relationship with Lindley. It turned out that after Ben's death, Lindley had started a relationship with Brandon. The two had even had a child together, but their relationship soured after a couple of years. This connection would prove to be more important than anyone could have imagined. Brandon, now deeply estranged from Lindley, came forward with a startling revelation. He told investigators that Lindley had confided in him about Ben's murder many times. According to Brandon, Lindley had openly confessed to conspiring with her ex-boyfriend, Michael Humphrey, to kill Ben. Lindley had even detailed how the murder went down, describing how Michael had originally agreed to kill Ben but backed out at the last minute, leaving Lindley to pull the trigger herself. Brandon's testimony turned the investigation upside down. He wasn't just some passive bystander, he was the missing piece to the puzzle that had been unsolved for so long. He described how Lindley had been desperate, financially burdened, and fearful of losing everything she had. He painted a picture of a woman willing to go to any lengths, including murder, to secure her future. Brandon's words, combined with his inside knowledge of the plot, gave investigators the breakthrough they had been waiting for. The twist didn't end there. In addition to his confession about Lindley's involvement, Brandon revealed that Lindley had been paranoid about being caught. She was careful not to speak about the murder over the phone, always ensuring that her and Brandon's phones were kept in separate rooms. Her actions only deepened the suspicion that she had something to hide. With this new information, the police were finally able to connect the dots. The pieces were falling into place. Brandon's testimony was key in building a case against Lindley. But it wasn't just his word alone. The investigators now had a clear motive: financial ruin, desperation, and a failed marriage. They also had Lindley's repeated lies, her failed polygraph test, and the growing suspicion around her behavior in the days following Ben's death. Slowly but surely, the truth was coming into focus, and Lindley's role in the murder was no longer a question. It was becoming a certainty. As investigators dug deeper, they began to uncover more disturbing details about Lindley's involvement in the crime. The cover-up efforts, the lies, and her involvement in attempting to poison Ben just weeks before his death were all starting to add up. And all the while, Lindley had continued to deny her role, insisting that she had nothing to do with her husband's murder. But with Brandon Blackwell's shocking confession and the mounting evidence against Lindley, the investigation had reached its turning point. What had once seemed like an unsolvable case now had the clarity it needed. The hunt for the truth was far from over, but the key players in this twisted story were finally being unmasked. In the end, the case of Ben Renick's murder would become a tale of deceit, betrayal, and the chilling lengths a person would go to when driven by desperation. And it was only through the unexpected tip-off from someone who once shared Lindley's life that the dark truth would be exposed. After 3 long years of twists, turns, and chilling revelations, the stage was finally set for the trial of Ben Renick, the woman who had been at the center of one of Missouri's most shocking murders. The courtroom drama would unfold in ways no one could have predicted, with accusations, lies, and betrayals flying thick and fast. And at the heart of it all was the deep-seated tension between Lindley and Michael Humphrey, 2 people who had conspired together to kill Ben Renick, but now found themselves pointing fingers at each other, desperate to save their own skin. Ben Renick sat in the courtroom, her emotions running high as the case against her unfolded. Her defense team painted a picture of a woman who had been caught in a toxic relationship, someone who had never wanted her husband dead, but who had been emotionally manipulated and forced into a corner by the circumstances of her life. Her lawyers argued that while she may have been in financial distress and unhappy in her marriage, she had not played a direct role in Ben's murder. In Lindley's eyes, Michael Humphrey was the true killer, and she claimed that he had acted on his own without her involvement. According to her, she had been caught off guard and was simply trying to survive the wreckage of her crumbling marriage. I walked up right behind Michael, and then Michael turned around, and I saw a gun in his hands, Lindley testified in her own defense. I didn't want any part of this. I didn't kill Ben. It was a heartbreaking performance for many in the courtroom, and for a brief moment, it seemed like her defense might hold weight. Lindley's claim that she had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, a helpless wife caught up in events beyond her control, seemed almost plausible. But then came Michael's testimony. Michael Humphrey, the man who had once been Lindley's lover and partner in crime, had made a shocking deal with prosecutors in exchange for his testimony. Facing life in prison for his role in Ben's murder, Michael agreed to cooperate, hoping to reduce his charge to second-degree murder with the possibility of parole. And when he took the stand, he didn't hold back. In a chilling account, Michael described how the murder was planned, step by step, with Lindley as the mastermind. He admitted that he had originally been tasked with killing Ben, but when it came time to carry out the deed, he had backed out, feeling conflicted and uncomfortable. But it was Lindley who wasn't willing to let the plan fall apart. She had taken the gun from him, walked into the barn, and killed Ben herself. Michael's testimony laid bare the cold, calculated nature of Lindley's involvement. She had pulled the trigger. She had made sure Ben was dead. I heard a shot, so I kind of ducked a little bit, and I looked down through there, and she was at the end of the corridor, posted up like this with the gun. Michael testified, his voice steady but filled with the weight of his confession. His words were a devastating blow to Lindley's defense, shattering any illusion that she was an innocent bystander caught up in a tragedy. The prosecution now had the key evidence they needed to prove that Lindley was not just an accessory, but the true orchestrator of Ben's murder. As the trial progressed, the tension in the courtroom became almost unbearable. Lindley's defense crumbled under the weight of Michael's testimony, and the jury was forced to confront the unvarnished truth. Lindley had not only been involved in the murder, she had masterminded it. The plan to kill Ben was hers, and she had taken the final deadly step to carry it out. After days of deliberations, the jury returned with their verdict. Ben Renick was found guilty of second-degree murder and armed criminal action. It was a stunning moment for everyone in the courtroom. The woman who had once been the grieving wife, the one who had insisted she was innocent, was now facing the consequences of her actions. She had been caught in a web of lies, and the truth had finally come to light. The sentencing phase was no less dramatic. Lindley's defense team pleaded for mercy, citing her children and the fact that she had been a victim of emotional distress. But the prosecution made it clear that Lindley's actions were cold-blooded and calculated, and she had shown no remorse for what she had done. The judge handed down a sentence of 13 years for second-degree murder and 3 years for armed criminal action, a total of 16 years in prison. The aftermath of the trial was just as dramatic. Ben Renick's family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, and the town of New Florence struggled to make sense of the events that had unfolded. Lindley's betrayal of her husband, her lies, and her role in his murder would haunt everyone involved. For Ben's family, justice had been served, but the pain of his loss would never truly go away. As for Michael, His reduced sentence was a bittersweet victory. He had cooperated with the authorities in exchange for a lesser charge, but his life was still forever altered by the murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, and while he would eventually have a chance for release, he would never escape the weight of his actions. The case of Ben Renick's murder was now closed, but the chilling tale of betrayal, greed, and murder would linger in the hearts and minds of everyone involved. It was a story of a life lost, a family destroyed, and the lengths one woman would go to in order to escape her own failures. It was a case that no one would forget, and for Lindley, it would be the story that defined the rest of her life. As the dust settles from the trial and the verdicts are handed down, one thing remains painfully clear. The murder of Ben Renick wasn't just the tragic death of a young man. It was the ultimate consequence of greed, betrayal, and the desperate lengths some people will go to protect their own selfish desires. Ben Renick, once a promising and beloved figure in the reptile breeding world, was stripped of his future by those closest to him. He had been a loving husband, a devoted father, and a man with a deep passion for his snakes. His life, though far from perfect, was one that many would envy, a future full of potential. And yet, in the blink of an eye, it was all taken away by a person he trusted most, his wife, Lindley. What makes Ben's story so heartbreaking is that it wasn't just a random act of violence. His death was planned, coldly calculated by someone who should have been by his side, supporting him through life's trials. The twisted nature of this case, how Lindley, driven by financial pressure and a crumbling marriage, could turn to murder, leaves a lasting impact on anyone who hears it. What started as a failed business venture, a strained relationship, and a moment of vulnerability spiraled into a dark, irreversible decision that shattered not just Ben's life, but the lives of their children and everyone who loved him. The case is a stark reminder of the dangerous consequences of unchecked greed and betrayal. Lindley's actions weren't just about money. They were about control, desperation, and a warped sense of entitlement. And while Lindley and Michael's lives will never be the same, the true victim in all of this is Ben, whose only fault was being in the wrong place at the wrong time, trusting the wrong people. As the final chapter of this tragic story closes, we're left with an important lesson. Nothing is more destructive than betrayal, especially when it comes from the people you love the most. It's a chilling reminder that even the closest relationships can mask the darkest secrets, and that sometimes the greatest betrayals come from those who stand closest to us. For those who knew Ben, the pain of his loss will never be fully healed. And as for Lindley, the damage she's done can never be undone. The consequences of her actions will haunt her for the rest of her life. But it's the memory of Ben Renick, a man whose life was stolen by those he loved, that will linger in the minds of everyone who follows this tragic tale. The final twist of this story is not just the verdict, but the reminder that in the end, nothing is more precious than trust, and nothing more dangerous than breaking it. What do you think about the shocking case of Ben Renick? Do you believe Lindley's desperation and financial struggles were enough to push her to murder? Or was there something deeper at play? We want to hear your thoughts on the twisted motivations behind this crime. Was it pure greed, or was it something more? Drop your comments below. Let's talk about what happened and why. And if you found this story as gripping as we did, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more true crime tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more stories you won't believe.